the NFL season means 3 weeks until it's time to push for that title. Every decision matters, so let's gear up those teams with some top 12 IDP rankings. Welcome back to the IDP Plus podcast. I'm your host on this show, the IDP Rankings. My name is Axton Harding. You can find me on Twitter at AxmanIDP. I should put out a matchup intel each week. Threw one out yesterday. I know a few of you guys like that, so if you're tuning into this for the first time, go ahead and check that out as well. But you can also reach out to me with any kind of questions or situations you might have with back and forth. Sometimes having an outside opinion is very valuable to make sure that you're not thinking too deep about something or overthinking a certain situation. Sometimes somebody can bring in a little extra context you might not have thought about, and that can also happen in the comments too. So feel free to throw down some comments and we can chat it up there. I love hopping in the comments with you guys. So, without further ado, we're going to cover the IDP rankings, top 12 rankings for the defensive line position, the linebacker position, and defensive backs. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. We'll get into the top 12 defensive linemen first. Big men in the trenches. So let's go 1 to 12. Myles Garrett, Brian Burns, Maxx Crosby, Montez Sweat at number 4, Andrew Van Ginkel, Aidan Hutchinson, TJ Watt, Josh Sweat, Jaelan Phillips, George Karlaftis, Leonard Williams, and Jeffery Simmons to round out the top 12 defensive linemen for Week 12. Let's jump back up to the top and talk a little bit about Myles Garrett, Cleveland Browns defensive end. Going up against the Vegas Raiders this week, he has compiled a whopping 14 tackles, 10 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, and 11 quarterback hits to go with a forced fumble in just the last 3 weeks. That's insane. That's more in the last 3 weeks than 90% of the NFL is going to get in an entire season as far as sacks and big plays go behind the line of scrimmage. That's pretty crazy. So only a good handful of people are even going to achieve 10 sacks in a given season, and he's done it in 3 weeks. That's wild. So let's talk about this matchup as it relates to this matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. Got to get my data right here. Just kind of talk about the numbers a little bit. So let's see. Cleveland, man. Oh my gosh, lost myself for a sec. There it is. All right. Yeah, Vegas Raiders have been giving up 1.67 sacks per game on average over the last 3 weeks to the defensive end position, to go with 10 tackles per game as well. That's a pretty modest number for a tackle floor coming into this. And Myles Garrett's not really known for having a high tackle floor. He's more of a guy you're going to go out and shoot for that big play upside. You just kind of take that with a grain of salt. He's just in a good opportunity to have plenty of chances to get some tackles. So if nothing else, maybe we can have a nice floor here. But especially with that Vegas offensive line, if you guys have been paying close attention at all, they are pretty horrific. And you give me a mediocre defensive line or offensive line, and Myles Garrett on the opposite side, I think that's a recipe for success for one of the league's top pass rushers. In Myles Garrett. So I think this week he continues this hot streak. He seems like he is on a mission to prove a point or get a new bag elsewhere after this season, possibly in a trade market, however that might look. Who knows? But either way, this guy is showing out. 10 sacks in the last 3 weeks. This is nuts. We're going to ride this wave until it ends. And of course, it will probably come down quite a bit from sacks. I wouldn't expect anything to quite that tune, but he should definitely have success, no less, against one of the league's worst offensive lines. So now let's talk about Brian Burns, another guy who's been doing outstanding this season, having a career year in 2025. Brian Burns doesn't necessarily find himself in a fairly lucrative matchup as it would relate to much production to the defensive end position. But he's playing the Detroit Lions this week. He comes into week 12 having compiled 14 tackles, 3 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, 7 quarterback hits, 3 pass deflections, and a forced fumble just in the last 3 weeks. Now, this matchup against Detroit is a tricky one because the numbers are a little bit deceiving. Detroit really hasn't played too great of a pass rush in the last few weeks. I think they've had kind of one more higher end matchup, but it didn't really amount to a whole lot of production. I think Jared Goff still gave up a sack to the defensive end position, if I remember it. I just have to go back and check for exactly which pass rush, but it wasn't anything to the tune of the New York Giants pass rush. So I think that this New York Giants defensive line has been pretty effective all year, and it hasn't mattered. You guys have seen week in and week out, Brian Burns seems to be able to get it done, and even in a matchup where he's not necessarily looking at a whole lot of opportunity on the table given up by the opposing offensive line, he's still able to land a couple of sacks, get a pass deflection, and add points to your fantasy team. So although we're looking at 0.33 sacks per game given up by the Detroit Lions the last 3 weeks, again, I think that's a little bit deceiving just because they haven't played near as an effective pass rush as what Brian Burns and the New York Giants are going to bring. Then if you want to talk about tackles given up to the position, this might be a little bit more kind of in line, perhaps. And who's even to say it's even a true representation, but 8.67 tackles on the table for the defensive end position. Brian Burns has a nice high floor of tackles anyways. Again, coming in with 14 tackles, he's going to bring you, 4 to 5 tackles per game on average. So that's pretty good for a stud defensive lineman to be able to carry that kind of tackling floor. And then, of course, the upside that is presented is just undoubtedly one of the best in the league at this point in the 2025 season. So Brian Burns ought to be just fine. Start him with confidence, regardless of a poor matchup, as the numbers might say. Maxx Crosby at number 3 here. Let's talk a little bit about his matchup with the Cleveland Browns. But first, we're going to talk about the stats coming into this week. Maxx Crosby has compiled 14 tackles, 2 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, 3 quarterback hits, a forced fumble, and a pass deflection, all in the last 3 weeks. And this matchup against Cleveland is a top 3 matchup as it relates to sack production given up by the Cleveland Browns offensive line. They've allowed opposing defensive ends to get back to Dylan Gabriel about 2.33 times per game on average just to the defensive end position. Maxx Crosby should have plenty of opportunity on the outside. Those tackles seem to be giving up plenty of production off the edge lately. And I don't imagine. I think it could be Shedeur Sanders in this one, which might even give Maxx Crosby a little bit more time, or perhaps he just might have a little bit more poise and be able to get the ball out quicker. Nonetheless, the offensive line is pretty porous, and if you give me a rookie quarterback against a guy like Maxx Crosby, he's going to welcome him to the NFL, that's no doubt. So, again, 2.33 sacks per game on the average given up by the Cleveland Browns offensive line. To go with 7 tackles per game, that's kind of middling or more bottom half. But Maxx Crosby is the kind of guy who's going to give you a pretty high tackle floor anyways. He's right there in line with Brian Burns, about 4 to 5 tackles per game on average. About 90 tackles in a season before. So I'm not really too worried about Maxx Crosby this week against the Cleveland Browns. We've got a lot of opportunity for some upside, and that floor is going to be there just naturally with Maxx Crosby. So let's talk about Montez Sweat. He's climbing the boards here at number 4, even though he had an off week last week. He comes in with 7 tackles, 2.5 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, 4 quarterback hits, and 3 pass deflections on the last 3 weeks. This matchup is going to be a pretty nice one for Montez Sweat this week playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've already been generous off the rip with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, where Pittsburgh's given up 2.17 sacks per game to the defensive end position over the last 3 weeks. They've also given up 10.67 tackles per game to the position as well, which is among let's see here, 10.67 top 3 matchup for tackles, and then it's also going to be a top 4 matchup for sacks as far as it relates to statistics given up over the last 3 weeks. The trends are showing that this is going to be a pretty good matchup, even if Aaron Rodgers were at quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it's actually going to even be Mason Rudolph for this week, which is going to give Montez Sweat so much time to get back there and land a sack. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a monster game this week with Mason Rudolph back there at quarterback. Aaron Rodgers gets the ball out a lot quicker than Mason Rudolph is going to be. So if you already have a terrible or a poor performing offensive line, And then you have a quarterback who's going to have to take more time to process his reads and understand where he's going to throw the football and take even a second longer. You're going to give a guy like Montez Sweat way too much time to get back there to quarterback. So I like him for a bounce back game in week 12. So let's talk about Andrew Van Ginkel as our 12. Andrew Van Ginkel comes in with 15 tackles, a sack, 3 quarterback hits, 3 tackles for loss, and 2 pass deflections. And he is back and healthy and back to his old ways. Andrew Van Ginkel has been putting up some nice modest production considering the fact that he just recently, a couple of weeks, got ramped up from coming off a neck injury that had me at least concerned for his outlook for the remainder of the season. But now that he's back, no injury designation, he's getting the stats that he was before, able to get back to the quarterback, get his hands on some passes. That's the Andrew Van Ginkel that we know and love from before the injury. So I think he is back at it. And this week he plays the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay Packers have been pretty generous. And this is looking like a divisional matchup here, where Green Bay and Minnesota are going to have a lot of back and forth. Again, these divisional matchups just mean that each team is going to know the other team almost like the back of their hand. They play each other a couple of times a year. They know the coaching tendencies and kind of how to game plan for these guys. And it's going to mean even more because they're trying to place above one another in the overall standings to get a higher seed into the playoffs and get an easier road to the Super Bowl. Should they make it that far. So Green Bay, this matchup, Green Bay's been giving up, 1.33 sacks per game to the defensive end position. Also a nice modest 9.33 tackles per game. I'd say that's probably top 5-ish. 5 to 10, probably more closer to 5. Either way, we're still looking at a nice top third matchup in both areas where for big plays and also tackle floor. And then if you want to talk about pass deflections, they've only given up 1 pass deflection to the defensive end position over the last 3 weeks. So nothing to write home there about. But Andrew Van Ginkel is definitely known to get his hands on some passes in coverage. So I think he might be able to buck that trend this week in week 12 against. We'll have to see how Jordan Love's doing. I believe he came back in the game last week, but we'll have to see, kind of monitor his injury status coming into this week. Anything can happen, but a divisional matchup, I got a feeling if he's able to, he'll be out there. So these averages will at least be kind of closer to what they have been with Jordan Love back there. So, there's going to be some opportunity there. And then with Jonathan Grenard out and Dallas Turner coming off the other side, I think it's just going to lend well to a little bit more opportunity for Andrew Van Ginkel and his nice established prowess there on that Minnesota pass rush. So he's looking hot, and let's expect that trend to continue. So let's talk about Aidan Hutchinson at number 6. Aidan Hutchinson comes into this week having collected only 5 tackles, a sack and a half, a tackle for loss, 5 quarterback hits, and a pass deflection. So he's able to get back there to the quarterback. He hasn't landed near as many sacks as he'd like to see with a guy who's getting about 5 quarterback hits in the last 3 weeks. But we're looking at a pretty good matchup against the New York Giants. We've seen some news about Jackson Dart and how he's going to have to be a little bit more careful when he's looking at scrambles. So I think he might try to hang out in the pocket a little bit longer. And if you're going to hang on the pocket, that's just going to give Aidan Hutchinson plenty of time to get back there and sack a rookie quarterback. I think he ought to be fine this week, where New York's giving up 1.67 sacks per game to the defensive end position over the last 3 weeks, to go with a nice 9.67 tackles per game as well. Aidan Hutchinson isn't really much for tackle production so far this season, but that doesn't mean that he wouldn't have a nice little game here against the New York Giants. They've kind of been scrappy in New York with Jackson Dart back there at quarterback, so it wouldn't surprise me if the Detroit Lions kind of look to put a little bit of extra pressure back there on Jackson Dart. And so I think Aidan Hutchinson ought to have himself a nice week this week. We're looking at some modest opportunity coming into this one. TJ Watt comes in at number 7. TJ Watt has a matchup against the Chicago Bears this week. He's compiled 7 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits, 3 pass deflections, a forced fumble, and fumble recovery in the last 3 weeks. This matchup against the Chicago Bears isn't necessarily a top-end matchup, but we are looking at a nice, modest tackle floor Chicago's been giving up the most tackles per game on average over the last 3 weeks to the defensive end position at 14.33. That's pretty handily the league lead, at least by 3 tackles per game, over 3 tackles per game. Just over the last few weeks, they've been getting that rushing game going pretty good, and it's been pretty nice for the opposing defensive lines. TJ Watt's actually had a nice tackle floor for much of this season. He's kind of cooled off a little bit as of late, but nonetheless, he's off to a nice little start for tackle production. And Chicago's also even given up a sack per game on average to the defensive end position and a pass deflection in coverage on average over the last 3 weeks. So maybe he gets his hand on a batted ball, gets back there for a sack, and has a nice tackling game. That would make for a nice little Sunday in Week 12 for TJ Watt. And I think that if anybody is going to be able to get back there to Caleb Williams past the Chicago offensive line, I think TJ Watt's going to be the first one to get back there and get a good crack. And he's able to add a lot of stats in plays behind the line of scrimmage with those tackles for loss and quarterback hits, able to get his hands on some batted balls. You can't really say that for everybody. Some players just don't think to put their hands up and get those batted balls, but it adds a lot of points to our fantasy rosters. And then also those nice tackles behind the line of scrimmage, able to get back there to the quarterback pretty consistently. So I think TJ Watt ought to be just fine this week against Chicago. Now let's go to Josh Sweat, number 8. Got a matchup against Jacksonville this week. He's got 4 tackles, 4 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, 7 quarterback hits, a pass deflection, fumble, forced fumble recovery, 7 quarterback hits. That's pretty dang good. This Arizona pass rush is kind of sneaky good with Calais Campbell there on the interior defensive line, actually having himself a nice season as well. But Josh Sweat is just, ever since he's left Philadelphia, seems like he's on a mission, and he has been nice this year. The only thing you kind of wish he would increase a little bit is maybe that tackle floor, but he's been pretty consistent in the big play department, and even when he's not able to land us a huge monster game, he's still able to give us a pretty decent floor of production for our IDP teams. So now let's talk about this matchup as he's going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Just so happens to be a top 10 matchup for defensive end. Top 7 matchup for defensive end sack production, where Jacksonville's given up 1.83 sacks per game to the defensive end position. There's no doubt if any defensive end on this line is going to get a sack, it's going to be Josh Sweat. And if Jacksonville's offensive line is either injured or just in a slump, kind of giving up some production to opposing pass rushes lately, Josh Sweat ought to have himself a nice little day. And they're also giving up 1 pass deflection per game on average to the defensive end position, and that's not necessarily attributable to the offensive line, more quarterback stat, I would imagine, where they're just making plays, not really paying attention to what the opposing defenders are doing, as they probably should. If you're paying too much attention to the defensive line, you're going to be letting them get in your head. You're going to be thinking too much. So Trevor Lawrence just seems to be extra susceptible as of late to pass deflections for opposing defensive ends, 1.83 sacks per game on average, given up by the offensive line. And then a nice, probably top 5-ish, 5 to 8, 10.33 tackles per game to the defensive end position as well. So maybe he can bump up that floor a little bit, and instead of just getting a tackle every time he gets a sack, let's hope maybe he can get a couple extra tackles, a pass deflection, maybe a tackle for loss or something like that, quarterback hit, just get us some extra stats that way. So I think Josh Sweat is going to have himself a nice week against a pretty vulnerable Jacksonville offensive line. All right, now let's talk about Jaelan Phillips. Since being traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, he has been solid his first 2 weeks as a Philadelphia Eagle. 15 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits, and a fumble recovery all in the last 3 weeks. Jaelan Phillips has been nice with this Philadelphia Eagles pass rush, and I expect that trend to continue in a divisional matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, where the Dallas Cowboys are giving up 1 sack per game to the defensive end position. Middling 8.67 tackles per game coming in on the table for Jaelan Phillips, but he's been on a tear. If you go look at his last couple of weeks, he's been pretty impressive with the tackle numbers. That kind of surprised me as I'm looking at the box score stats throughout my Sundays. I'm consistently seeing Jaelan Phillips among the top top tacklers early on in these games in the last couple of weeks. As he's playing for Philadelphia, the pass rush there just isn't quite what it seems, but they have enough talent, especially on the interior with Brandon Graham now, to add, give Jaelan Phillips a little bit more opportunity. For whatever reason, Miami's pass rush just wasn't quite getting it done. They've got some key pieces there, but seems like Jaelan Phillips is also 1.33 pass deflections on the table on average, given up by the Dallas by Dak Prescott to opposing defensive ends on average over the last 3 weeks. He's going to be throwing the ball and chucking it a ton. Chances are there's going to be somebody get their hands on it, and Jaelan Phillips is one of the most talented, if not the most talented, pass rusher on this Philadelphia offensive line. He's definitely the most experienced with regard to, of course, guys like Brandon Graham. But I feel like I couldn't remember if he was. I know he signed back with them, but I haven't paid too much attention to the interior defensive line, if he's playing a heavy amount of snaps or if he's more just a locker room presence and kind of rotating in. So, but either way, they've got enough talent to kind of open things up for him. Been pretty lucrative for our IDP team, so I think he's looking pretty good this week. All right, now we're looking at George Karlaftis. Excuse me. George Karlaftis, our number 10 defensive lineman, playing the Indianapolis Colts this week. He's got 12 tackles, a sack and a half, 2 tackles for loss, 5 quarterback hits, and a pass deflection all in the last 3 weeks. And this matchup for Indianapolis is looking pretty nice, where Daniel Jones has been sacked a total of 15 times in the last 3 games. 5 sacks on average given up by his offensive line over the last 3 weeks to opposing just to the opposition in general. It's been pretty wild. They usually, to start the season, they were pretty solid, and they're really great in the rushing game, but it seems like they've kind of faltered in the pass rush game or in the passing game and pass blocking. So we're looking at a pretty nice matchup here, where Indianapolis is actually giving up a league-leading 2.67 tackles per game just to the defensive end position, and they're giving up a middling 9 tackles per game as well on average, to go with a couple of pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. But again, we're targeting that big play upside. Karlaftis comes in with a nice floor already, with what did I say, 12 tackles, a nice 4 tackle average already for a defensive lineman, and then you add 2.67 tackle or sack opportunities for the defensive end position. He's the most talented defensive end, if you don't want to count Chris Jones on the opposite side, but lately he's definitely been showing out more than Chris Jones. I think Chris Jones just got his first sack of the season last week against Denver, but Karlaftis has been a lot more consistent over the course of the season, and you've got a lot of opportunity here on the table, so I like Karlaftis this week. So let's talk about Leonard Williams, the Seattle Seahawks defensive end. He kind of rotates from the end to the interior. But this week playing the Tennessee Titans, a vulnerable offensive line as well. He's got 11 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, and 3 quarterback hits over the last 3 weeks. And he's got this matchup against Tennessee. Let's see here. Oh my goodness. Seattle, there you are. It's at the top. Sorry, gotta go back. Gotta remember which column I'm in here. So this matchup against Tennessee is a pretty nice one. It's a top 6 matchup for sack production given up to the respective position, and they're giving up 2 sacks per game to the defensive end position. And Leonard Williams, again, rotating kind of in and out on the edge and interior, he's going to have plenty of opportunity against a porous Tennessee offensive line, also giving up a middling 7.67 tackles per game to the position as well over the last 3 weeks. Leonard Williams, I think, is going to have himself a nice little day. The Seattle Seahawks pass rush has been pretty impressive, and Tennessee's been extremely vulnerable. So I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity on the table. Leonard Williams has been the top producer there on that defensive line for Seattle overall. With regard to DeMarcus Lawrence's wild, insane 2-touchdown week a couple of weeks ago, Leonard Williams has been a lot more consistent. So I think he ought to have a nice day against the Tennessee Titans. So let's talk about Jeffery Simmons here at number 12. Jeffery Simmons comes into this week Tennessee Titans interior defensive lineman. Yes, a defensive tackle made the top 12. He plays the Seattle Seahawks this week, having compiled, let's see, 11 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 3 quarterback hits, and 2 sacks over the last 3 weeks. So identical stats. I literally went back and checked the data because he and Leonard Williams have the same exact stats over the last 3 weeks: 11 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. Oh, so Leonard Williams had 2 tackles for loss. Okay, so sorry, I was a little bit confused there. I was like, did I just copy and paste that for whatever reason? But no worries. Yeah, it's basically the same kind of stats. Jeffery Simmons has been on a tear this season, and this matchup against the Seattle Seahawks isn't necessarily a great one, where Seattle's not giving up a whole lot of production to the interior defensive line. But I did go back and look; they really haven't played a whole lot of great pass rushes. And I'm not saying Tennessee Titans have a great pass rush, but a guy like Jeffery Simmons has been pretty consistent, even little to no help on that defensive line. Arden Key's been okay for much of the season, but nothing to write home about, nothing that's just wildly going to open up a lot of opportunity. But he's been able to make the most of the opportunity that he does have, and he's been a wrecker in the backfield coming off that interior defensive line. I don't know if he's playing for some extra cash. I feel like he had already signed his extension, which could be anyway. He seems motivated. He's been consistent much of this season. We're not looking at a whole lot of stats on the table here, but I think Tennessee's going to be on the field plenty, and Seattle should end up running the ball plenty at some point, at least by half. Game get out of hand. Sam Darnold's kind of been up and down, but this ought to be a nice matchup for him to get going. So I think Tennessee Titans and Jeffery Simmons ought to be just fine this week against against the Seattle Seahawks. All right, so that'll do it for the defensive linemen. We got Myles Garrett, Brian Burns, Maxx Crosby, Montez Sweat, Andrew Van Ginkel, Aidan Hutchinson, T.J. Watt, Josh Sweat, Jaelan Phillips, George Karlaftis, Leonard Williams, and Jeffery Simmons to round out the top 12 defensive linemen for Week 12. So now let's go into the linebacker position and talk about the top 12 there. Sorry, guys, I won't get so long-winded with this one. Want to still kind of, be respectful of your all's time, of course. Nobody wants to listen to somebody ramble on about their top 12 rankings for 2 hours here. So let's talk about top 12 rankings for the linebackers. Roquan Smith at number 1, Foyesade Oluokun at 2, Blake Cashman, Jack Campbell, Nate Landman, Zack Baun, Terrel Bernard, Robert Spillane, Cedric Gray, Jamien Sherwood, Tremaine Edmunds, and Quay Walker to round out the top 12 linebackers for Week 12. So Roquan Smith at number 1 has 22 tackles, a quarterback hit, and 3 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. In this matchup here, if I can get rid of my defensive line stats, I'll have a little bit better idea of what I can talk about specifically with these numbers. It's going to be a top 4 matchup for tackle production to the linebacker position, where the New York Jets have pass game. But also, mind you, these stats are based on Justin Fields being at quarterback. Now, Tyrod Taylor's going to be back there. They're going to throw the ball probably quite a bit more, but they also don't have Garrett Wilson. They have virtually no pass catchers outside of Mason Taylor. Mason Taylor should have himself a nice little game, but I think that's going to lend well to our linebacker production as well, where in coverage, chances are he's going to guard the big guy kind of right in the middle there. And Mason Taylor's going to be likely one of the lead targets for this team, with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback kind of sitting back there in the pocket. But nonetheless, they're still going to run the ball plenty. Breece Hall's been running the ball a ton. And this New York Jets team has just kind of got a ground game kind of stamped on them for much of the season. That's really been the only thing that's worked. They really don't have many great pass catchers to open up the open field. So, giving up 20 tackles per game to the linebacker position over the last 3 weeks on average, we're looking at a nice high tackle floor, and I think there's going to be some mistake-prone mistakes happen on this New York Jets offense. They just haven't looked great all season. And Tyrod Taylor didn't come in and kill a bear a few weeks ago when he was playing. I think this ought to be a lot of ground game, and Roquan Smith ought to have himself a nice little day. Granted that it's not just a whole bunch of 3 and outs, and Baltimore doesn't get on the field a whole lot. So that's the only caveat with this one. But game script is kind of going to play in the favor. Tyrod Taylor's going to be more competitive than Justin Fields. I'd say that he'll be able to keep this team in this game, kind of sustain a lot more longer drives here. So I think that's going to lend well to production for Roquan Smith. Now let's talk about Foyesade Oluokun, been among the top few guys every week for the linebacker position. He plays Arizona. He has 25 tackles, a tackle for loss, and four pass deflections in coverage. And this matchup against the Arizona Cardinals is not the best one here, literally, but it is a top 6 matchup for tackle production. And we're looking at some modest big play opportunity as well, where we're looking at 19 tackles per game on average given up to opposing linebackers by the Arizona Cardinals, and also 0.67 sacks per game. They've given up a couple sacks to the position as well, so perhaps there might be some opportunity for big plays should he get back there involved in any kind of blitz packages for Jacksonville. I think this is going to be a nice high floor tackle game for Foye. You find him a high producer week in and week out in a nice matchup with an offensive line giving up modest production to the position. I think it's a nice little combo there, and Foye ought to be just fine this week. All right, now let's talk about Blake Cashman. Blake Cashman's been on fire as of the last 3 weeks. 40 tackles, a tackle for loss, and a forced fumble. He has been an absolute tackling machine. And now he gets a great matchup in Green Bay, who tend to run the ball a ton. So looking at a top 8 matchup just behind a couple of spots behind Foye's matchup here. In this interdivisional matchup, Green Bay's been giving up 18.67 tackles per game to the linebacker position. They've also given up a sack in the last 3 weeks. They've given up 2 pass deflections, so there might be some opportunities for other big plays, but we're really targeting this streak he's on. 40 tackles over the last 3 weeks, and he's also the primary inside linebacker who's getting most, or if not all, 100% of the snaps, and he's the only one getting full-time snaps there in Minnesota. So these 18.67 tackles are going to give him first opportunity to get back there and make some plays happen. Hopefully he can make some plays behind the line of scrimmage and add some big play points that way to our IDP teams. But expect Blake Cashman to continue this role he's been on. So let's talk about Jack Campbell. I can't seem to get Jack Campbell right since I've got him in the top 12, but we're going to this week. He has a matchup against the New York Giants. He has 30 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits, and a sack over the last 3 weeks. This matchup against the New York Giants over the last 3 weeks has been a pretty good one, where New York's giving up 19.67 tackles per game to the linebacker position, also giving up a pass deflection and coverage on average to that position as well over the last 3 weeks. So Jack Campbell, I think, is going to have himself a nice little day here against Jackson Dart. Should he come back from that concussion, perhaps he gets involved in more blitz packages and gets some big play points that way as well. I don't think he had a sack last week. He had this last week he did. It was a couple of weeks ago when I had him in the top 12 that he fell flat because he had a great matchup and didn't produce at all. But we're not gonna make the mistake for setting him out like we did last week. When he did have a good game, and now we've got some opportunity here where New York likes to run the ball a lot, and they're giving up lots of tackling production on the table. Jack Campbell is a nice high tackle floor type of guy, been getting about 8 to 9 tackles per game on average, been able to rush the quarterback, and get some big play points in the sack department as well. He's been very nice this season. So I think he'll be just fine against New York this week. Now let's talk about Nate Landman. 23 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 3 forced fumbles in the last 3 weeks. He's kind of cooled off since he had a nice little stretch there in the middle of the season. This matchup this week against Tampa Bay is going to be a top 2 matchup for tackle production to the linebacker position. Tampa Bay is giving up 21 tackles per game on average to the linebacker position as a whole over the last 3 weeks. There's also opportunity for plays in coverage where they're giving up 1.67 pass deflections per game on average to the linebacker position as well. So there's going to be tons of passing and some mistake-prone passing. Baker Mayfield's imperfect, but he's not. He's a great quarterback. But of course, when you pass the ball that much, sometimes you got to take some shots, and he seems to be a guy that likes to take a few risks here and there. Not that it's been to the detriment of the team overall, but he's it's just kind of been that way. So there might be some opportunity for him to make plays in coverage and also just soak up a whole bunch of runs as well. So, but I think Bucky Irving ought to be back. That should lend well more to those tackling opportunities as well. So I think Nate Landman in a nice spot this week against Tampa Bay. All right, Zack Baun, number 6 against the Dallas Cowboys this week. He's got 21 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a quarterback hit, a sack, and 2 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. He plays the Dallas Cowboys, who Dallas Cowboys are giving up. Oh man, where was it at? Right there. Well, it's kind of a middling matchup for tackle production overall. They're not giving up a whole lot of big plays either to the linebacker position, but I don't think they've quite played a defense the caliber of Philadelphia. But overall, 17 tackles per game on average given up to the position. I think Zack Baun's kind of laid back a little bit in coverage. It's been the Kobe Dean rushing the passer and kind of coming off the edge a little bit more. I think Zack Baun's going to be in a little bit more lucrative position to get his hands on some tip passes or something like that with Dallas. Dak Prescott's going to be throwing the ball a ton, and there's also going to be plenty of tackling opportunity. You ought to be right there in the best position to soak up a lot of those Javonte Williams rushes up the middle. So I think Zack Baun's going to continue his nice little productive season here in Week 12. Now let's talk about Terrel Bernard, a number 7 linebacker, playing against the Houston Texans this week. He's got 22 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. Playing the Houston Texans, who are a nice matchup this week. Top 10 matchup for tackle production over the last 3 weeks. 17.67 tackles per game given up to the position. There's also plenty of big play upside on the table as well, where the Houston Texans have given up 2 sacks to the linebacker position and two sacks over the last 2 sacks in the last 3 weeks and 2 pass deflections on average over the last 3 weeks to the position. So there's big play opportunities in coverage and also in the pass rush game where maybe he gets back involved in a blitz and gets back there and gets a sack on Davis Mills, I believe, is going to be starting again. So, yeah, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for Terrel Bernard now that it seems like he's shaken his injury woes that have pretty well hampered him for much of the season. I think he's getting back to kind of that pre-injury form where he was really producing consistently right around the double-digit tackle numbers week in and week out last year. I think now that he's healthy, he's probably going to get back to more of that, and maybe we can get some big play opportunities as well. So I think he's going to have plenty of chances to score plenty of IDP points this week. Now let's talk about Robert Spillane. Robert Spillane has compiled 23 tackles, a tackle for loss, and 2 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. He's placed the Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati Bengals aren't going to present too tasty of a matchup here, where they're only giving up top 19 tackle matchup for 15.67 tackles per game given up to the linebacker position. There's some opportunities for big plays in coverage, though. They've given up an interception to the position in the last 3 weeks. They've also given up 1.67 pass deflections on average over the last 3 weeks. So we're looking at some nice modest production on the table in the passing game, where Joe Flacco's going to air it out a ton. And again, those guys that air it out a ton tend to take shots, and when you're throwing it to some tight ends over the middle of the field or on some crossers, you find some linebackers in the middle of the field. And Robert Spillane, with his 2 pass deflections in the last couple of weeks, is no stranger to getting his hands on some footballs in coverage. So I think even though there might not be a huge amount of tackles on the table coming into this one, again, he's the only full-time linebacker there in New England, so he's going to get a bulk of the opportunity to soak up those tackles from the rushing game of Cincinnati. So I think there's going to be some opportunities in coverage here, and then he's going to bring in a nice high tackle floor as well. So I like Robert Spillane this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. Now let's talk Cedric Gray, guy who's been a revelation this season. I think he's a second-year linebacker out of Tennessee. Plays the Seattle Seahawks this week, 32 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a quarterback hit, 2 pass deflections, a fumble recovery, and a sack over the last 3 weeks. Again, playing that Seattle Seahawks team that tends to run that two-headed monster, and Zach Charbonnet and Quay Walker run that tandem into the ground. And it's kind of been mind-numbing if you roster either one of them, because they both get about 10 to 12 or 15 touches per game on average, and neither one of them really excels because they just can't get anything going, no momentum. So enough said about that. Let's talk specifically About the numbers and the matchup. For tackle production, it's a bottom 10 matchup. They're only giving up 14.67 tackles per game on average over the last 3 weeks, the Seattle Seahawks offensive line. But they've given up 2 pass deflections in coverage. Perhaps he gets his hands on some batted balls there. I'm more just riding that nice, high, consistent floor that he's given us over like the last, 6 to 8 weeks plus of double digit tackles week in and week out, able to get back there behind the line of scrimmage. As I mentioned with those tackles for loss, he's even in on the pass rush game. We're getting a sack, and he does it in coverage too with those pass deflections. So Cedric Gray is a guy you're going to want to keep in your lineups week in and week out. So now let's talk Jamien Sherwood, our number 10 linebacker this week. Jamien Sherwood plays the Baltimore Ravens. He's only got 19 tackles and 2 pass deflections the last 3 weeks. So kind of had a little bit of a lull for a guy who was kind of hot there with a nice modest tackle floor there for a good stretch of the middle of the season. Now this New York Jets defense is kind of questionable all over. There's a lot of, especially with there's just been kind of some inconsistencies, some benchings, and some injuries and what have you. So it's kind of been a little bit up and down. But we're looking at a nice matchup this week for tackle production, where the Baltimore Ravens are giving up 17.33 tackles per game to the linebacker position on average. And Jamien Sherwood, albeit hasn't been all that hot lately as he was earlier in the season, I think he can get back on track in this one. He's playing against the Baltimore Ravens, who are going to run the ball plenty, be soaking up plenty of those Derrick Henry tackles, and Jamien Sherwood is no stranger to the double-digit tackle game. Again, I think he averaged it for much of the season last year, led the league in solo tackles overall. I think this is a good bounce-back week for Jamien Sherwood. So let's talk Tremaine Edmunds, another revelation this season. Tremaine Edmunds has been very consistent for much of the year, and we're not going to ride the matchup in this one because it ends up being a bottom-of-the-barrel matchup. But we're riding the wave of production. Week in and week out, he's been able to do it and put points on the board for us regardless of matchup. So again, you don't sit your studs. Doesn't matter what the matchup or numbers show, they tend to outperform expectations. That's just what they do. And so Tremaine Edmunds has proved this season that he is a stud. He's someone we can rely on, and Chicago's utilizing him very effectively. He's got 25 tackles, a tackle for loss, 2 quarterback hits, 4 pass deflections, and an interception in coverage over the last 3 weeks. Now this matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers, again, isn't looking like a particularly tasty matchup, where Pittsburgh's giving up a second least 12.33 tackles per game to that position over the last 3 weeks. They've given up 2 pass deflections on average over the last 3 weeks, or 2 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. And so, the numbers wouldn't suggest that he's going to have a great game or that he's not walking into a whole lot of opportunity. But Tremaine Edmunds has been outperforming expectations all season. I would never have imagined that he would be putting up the numbers that he has this season. I think we can continue to ride that wave as long as he'll let us. So let's talk Quay Walker at number 12 to round out the linebacker position. He comes in with 20 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, a quarterback hit over the last 3 weeks. Kind of been on a lull himself. But again, I think this is a good get right game for against the Minnesota Vikings, where the Minnesota Vikings are giving up 17.33 tackles per game to the linebacker position, to go with 2 sacks given up to the position over the last 3 weeks as well. Also giving up 2 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks to the linebacker position. So we're looking at a pretty modest game here. And again, a divisional matchup means it's going to be a lot of back and forth. This ought to be a pretty close game. I expect Minnesota to have some fairly long drives to be able to be competitive in this game, and Quay Walker's going to have to be on the receiving end of a lot of those Jordan Mason rushes in order to stop them and make things happen there. And I think this is a good get-right spot in a divisional matchup against the Minnesota Vikings this week for Quay Walker. So I'd feel pretty good about starting Quay Walker this week. So now let's round out the top 12 again. Roquan Smith at number 1, Foyesade Oluokun, Blake Cashman, Jack Campbell, Nate Landman, Zack Baun, Terrel Bernard, Robert Spillane, Cedric Gray, Jamien Sherwood, Tremaine Edmunds, and Quay Walker to round out the top 12 linebackers. All right, y'all. Now let's get to the secondary and talk defensive backs. This is kind of one of the harder positions to gauge week in and week out, especially this season. There's been a lot of inconsistency. We haven't had a whole lot of good consistent players. All of our top end producers, not all of them, a handful of our top end producers have been kind of up and down this season. Where Kyle Hamilton's kind of been disappeared, injured, and then all of a sudden plays a couple games, comes back, and has a monster game, and now it's about time for him to fall off. So I'm not going to put him in my top 12. He's not proved to me that he can put in week-to-week production. It's just pretty matchup dependent. So that was just more or less an example, but let's jump into the top 12. Tykee Smith at number 1, Nick Cross, Tre'Von Moehrig, Kamren Curl, Jeremy Chin, Brian Branch, Amani Hooker, Chamarri Conner, Kemari Lassiter, Jordan Poyer, Cooper DeJean, and Andrew Wingard at the top 12 defensive backs for this week. So we're looking a little dicey this week, a lot of new names. So let's jump into some of the numbers and matchups that we've got here. So Tykee Smith at number 1 got 21 tackles, a tackle for loss, quarterback hit, an interception, and 4 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. In this matchup against the LA Rams is looking to shape up to be a nice matchup as it relates to production to opposing safeties. LA is giving up 18.33 tackles per game to the safety position over the last 3 weeks on average. That's number 2. That's top 2 most tackles given up to the safety position in the NFL, only behind San Francisco. They've also given up 1.33 pass deflections on average over the last 3 weeks to the position as well. Start Tykee Smith with confidence each and every week. I don't care the matchup. We're not going to go into too much about that. He's been insane. It's awesome. He's a great player. So ride that wave. Might just watch out for the injury. I think it was a concussion. He came back into the game, but I don't foresee that being anything that's going to affect him this week. So let's talk Nick Cross. Nick Cross comes off his bye week this week, and he plays Kansas City in a nice, ought to be a good matchup. A lot of back and forth, I imagine, this week for the Indianapolis-Kansas City game. He's got 16 tackles, a quarterback hit, and a sack over his last 3 games. This game against Kansas City is looking like a pretty good one as it relates to tackle production, where Kansas City is giving up 17 tackles per game on average to the safety position. Also giving up 2 pass deflections to opposing safeties as well. Patrick Mahomes has been pretty careless in the passing game, kind of made some boneheaded mistakes that have cost the team. But that's just kind of been the story of the Chiefs this season, so we can look to capitalize on that this week with Nick Cross's matchup. I expect him to be pretty active. Kansas City's been running the ball as well a little bit more, and those safeties that line up around the box are going to get favored a little bit for tackle production. So I expect Nick Cross to have himself a nice week this week against Kansas City. All right, now let's talk Tre'Von Moehrig, number 3 defensive back this week. He's got 23 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 quarterback hits in the last 3 weeks. Looking at a nice matchup here. Again, as I said on Tykee Smith, LA is only behind San Francisco, who Tre'Von Moehrig is playing this week. San Francisco has given up a league-leading 19 tackles per game on average to the safety position over the last 3 weeks. They've given up a couple pass deflections and coverage in that time as well, but we're more targeting that high tackle floor for a guy like Tre'Von Moehrig who can really achieve those double digits. I think he's coming off an 11 tackle game, a nice little stretch for Tre'Von Moehrig here after kind of a slow little middle to the season. Even able to get behind the line of scrimmage and make some tackles for loss, add some extra points to our IDP rosters. I think Carolina and Tre'Von Moehrig find themselves in a nice spot as it relates to safety production. Now let's talk Kamren Curl, number 4 defensive back. He comes in against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week playing... He's got 22 tackles and a quarterback hit in the last 3 weeks. Been able to compile a hefty amount of tackles in that time. Now we're looking at kind of a top 11 matchup overall, where Tampa Bay is giving up 15.33 tackles per game to the safety position. Now with Quentin Lake out, Kamren Curl is going to have to do a little bit extra. Tampa Bay has also given up a half sack to the position in the last 3 weeks. They've given up 1.67 pass deflections on average over the last 3 weeks as well to opposing safeties. So I think Kamren Curl is going to continue to, he's going to be one of your nice, more consistent defensive backs week in and week out. You just kind of hope 1 week here and there he can get you an interception, some pass deflections, some plays behind the line of scrimmage. But I think especially with Quentin Lake kind of being out, I expect him to be playing a little bit heavier around the box and probably taking up some of that production as well. So I think Kamren Curl finds himself in a nice spot this week against Tampa Bay. Let's talk about Jeremy Chinn. Jeremy Chinn makes the top 12 again. Last time we had him in the top 12, he had himself a nice little week. So we find him back here again against the Cleveland Browns. 22 tackles and tackle for loss over the last 3 weeks. Jeremy Chinn is looking at a top 7 matchup, 16.67 tackles per game given up to the safety position by the Cleveland Browns over the last 3 weeks. They've given up a sack to the position, also given up 1.33 pass deflections on average in that time too. So Cleveland's been pretty vulnerable. Now again, those numbers are with Dylan Gabriel at quarterback. If we're looking at Shedeur Sanders, who knows what we're going to be looking at here, but I think it's going to be a lot of short area passes, which is going to lend well to Jeremy Chinn lining up in the box pretty often. So that's going to, again, lend well to those box players. And I think this matchup against Cleveland is going to be a nice one here. We're already looking at a nice high tackle floor just from game scheme and how this team operates and the production they give up to opposing defenses. Jeremy Chinn has got a nice high, 5 to 7 tackle floor here. So I think we could be looking at it one of the higher producing games for him this week. So Jeremy Chinn, number 5 defensive back on week 12. Now let's talk Brian Branch, number 6 defensive back, playing against the New York Giants this week. He's got 19 tackles, a tackle for loss, 2 quarterback hits, and a sack and a half in the last 3 weeks. Plays the New York Giants and a mistake-prone Jackson Dart. So let's take a look. Detroit, it's a top 10 matchup as it relates to tackle production to opposing safeties. So we're looking at a nice high tackle floor, 16 tackles per game given up to the safety position on average over the last 3 weeks. Also to go with a couple of sacks in that time and 1.67 pass deflections per game in that time as well. So we've got a lot of opportunity here, a nice high tackle floor to go with some modest sack production where they're almost given up. Had they given up one more sack to the position, they'd be one on average over the last 3 weeks. And then you're also looking at almost 2 pass deflections given up to the position on average as well in recent trends. So I think Brian Branch is looking at a nice little game here against Jackson Dart and the New York Giants. Start him with confidence. I think this ought to be a good game for him. So now let's talk about Amani Hooker, our number 7 defensive back. Plays against the Seattle Seahawks. He's got 21 tackles, 4 pass deflections in the last 3 weeks. Kind of a more simpler stat line, but we're looking at those tackles and have himself a nice high tackling game this week as well. And Seattle is giving up 15 tackles per game on average to the safety position, and Amani Hooker's I believe one of the definitely the team's best defensive back, and he should be up there in terms of overall tackles on an individual's basis as well on that team. Obviously, Cedric Gray is probably going to be leading that hands down, but Amani Hooker should be pretty up there as well. So I think this matchup against Seattle with the 15 tackles per game given up, they've also given up a couple of interceptions, so perhaps there's some opportunity for some interception points for our IDP teams. They've been modest in coverage in the passing game and to production for opposing safeties. So I think Amani Hooker might be on a little streak here. I think this ought to be a good spot for him. So let's talk about Chamarri Conner, Kansas City Chiefs strong safety at number 8. He comes into this week with 23 tackles, a tackle for loss, a quarterback hit, and a sack. He kind of gets it all. Gets involved in everything. He'll even get back there in coverage and get his hands on some batted balls as well. This matchup specifically for this week, we're looking at a top 9 matchup for safety production where Indianapolis has given up 16.33 tackles per game on average to the safety position. They've also given up a sack and almost 2 pass deflections in coverage as well, 1.67 per game there. In that category. So Chamarri Conner is a high floor producer. He's been on a little streak lately, and when given plenty of opportunity. Even the numbers have shown too. When he gets in a nice little matchup, he has himself a nice little game. So I think this is going to be a big game for Kansas City and Indianapolis. Kansas City is going to have to get their heads out of their rear and win some games if they want to make the playoffs, or let alone have any chance to compete for a Super Bowl. They better get some things done. And the defense has been pretty solid. So Chamarri Conner is a big part of that, getting back there in some blitz packages and getting involved in the in plays behind the line of scrimmage. He does really well, and he's on a little bit of a streak here. So I think these 16.33 tackles per game should do him well this week. So now let's talk about Kemari Lassiter. Our cornerback makes the top 12 defensive backs for this week. We've seen him a few weeks ago where he kind of popped off for us in a nice little matchup, so we're going to go back to that well. And another nice matchup. He's got 13 tackles and 4 pass deflections over the last 3 weeks. We're also looking at a nice matchup where he finds himself in the most productive and ideal matchup for cornerback production, where Buffalo is giving up the league most 17.67 tackles per game on average to cornerbacks over the last 3 weeks. Yes, that for those of you that don't know, that includes wide corners, slot corners, and nickelbacks. So we're looking at some nice, modest production for the wide corners this weekend. Kemari Lassiter has been a high floor tackler for much of the season, so I think we're looking at a nice, solid floor for this week. And then there's even some opportunity for where Buffalo's giving up a sack to the position, giving up 1.33 pass deflections as well. If they're going to be throwing the ball as much as they are and giving up that many tackles to cornerbacks, Kemari Lassiter is going to get it done, and he's going to be able to find ways to put points on the board for us. So he's in a nice little matchup this week. So we're going to target that, and we're going to look to stream a little cornerback here. So let's talk about Jordan Poyer and our top 12 defensive back. He's actually getting 100% of snaps the last couple of weeks, from what I could tell, 90 or more, 80, 90 or more. He's playing almost full-time snaps. And Jordan Poyer, if you guys have been in IDP for too long, he's been a guy who just carries a nice high floor. So you find him in a good matchup, he's just going to have a nice little, you feel confident about those good matchups. And he's just historically been a nice, very consistent, again, high floor tackler that you can really rely on week in and week out. So again, he's got 28 tackles and a pass deflection in the last 3 weeks, almost 10 tackles per game on average for Jordan Poyer in that time. Plays the Houston Texans. Let's go back to our safety production here. The Houston Texans are, oh my gosh, where am I at? Buffalo Bills. It's a middling matchup for safety tackle production, where Houston's only given up 14.67 tackles per game on average over the last 3 weeks. But we're looking at some modest production opportunity in coverage, where they're giving up 2 pass deflections to the position over that time as well. They've given up a sack in that time, but Houston Davis Mills has been modest in the passing game. I think Jordan Poyer ought to have himself a nice high tackling floor. Be able to soak up many of those tackles, especially when given full-time snaps. Jordan Poyer is going to make the most of those opportunities. He's always, carries a nice high floor of production for tackles. You just kind of hope he can sprinkle in a little bit on top with some pass deflections, or maybe some behind the line of scrimmage. So let's talk Cooper DeJean at number 11, our number 11 defensive back for the Philadelphia Eagles, nickel corner. We're looking at a nice matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. Slot corner, excuse me. Sorry, guys. Correct myself there. But again, he comes in with only 14 tackles, tackle for loss, 2 pass deflections, and an interception in the last 3 weeks. Kind of been slow for Cooper DeJean after a little bit of a hot start, and then a nice little end to the season last year. He's kind of in a little bit of a lull, but I think we might have that opportunity for a nice little bounce back spot here, where Dallas Cowboys are going to present a nice matchup for opposing cornerback production. Top 3 matchup, 17 tackles per game on the table coming into this matchup for opposing corners and nickelback or slot corners for the Philadelphia Eagles. They don't have a whole lot of high-producing defensive backs other than Cooper DeJean, and he's been on a little lull, but we're in a good spot here where Dallas is going to air it out a ton. Philadelphia secondary is going to be pretty busy there, and so I think Cooper DeJean can have himself a nice little game following around some George Pickens and base packages, and then Leonard or Flournoy doesn't really excite me as the slot receiver for Dallas, but nonetheless, you just hope that Cooper DeJean can kind of get out there and maybe get on some of the more popular targets there. So there's going to be tons of passes in this one, tons of production. I think Cooper DeJean has a nose for the football, and I think he's going to be looking at a good matchup. Also, we're looking at 4.33 pass deflections per game given up to the cornerback position as well. Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys are a mistake-prone offense, and he's going to air it out and take a lot of chances. And oftentimes, that's a league most, by the way, 4.33. The next highest is 3.33, so it's a whole pass deflection per game, more than the second team giving up the most next most production. So we're looking at a nice matchup for Cooper DeJean. So now let's talk about Andrew Wingard, a number 12 defensive back for Week 12. You guys might be wondering who Andrew Wingard is. It is the strong safety for... Oh, excuse me. Sorry, guys. I accidentally clicked that button. Strong safety for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Finds himself in a nice tackling matchup. Go back and look at his statistics. He brings a nice high tackle floor to his game. And Jacksonville finds himself in a matchup. I had to get in on this one because Arizona's been very generous to opposing defensive backs with Jacoby Brissett there at quarterback. And I think Andrew Wingard is the most likely candidate to compile a majority of the tackles for this defensive back room for Jacksonville. They've given up top 17 tackles per game to the opposing safety position. There's also a nice modest pass deflection floor as well over the last 3 weeks where Arizona's given up 2.33 pass deflections in coverage on average over the last 3 weeks to the safety position. That is a league-leading amount combined with a top 3 matchup for tackle production. I think Andrew Wingard is looking at a nice matchup here. Again, 17 tackles per game, 2.33 pass deflections on average over the last 3 weeks as well. Even a half sack and 1 interception in that time too, given up by Arizona. So there should be a nice floor of production for tackles on the table for Andrew Wingard. There should also be a lot of opportunity for some big plays in coverage too. So I'm loving this matchup for all the Jacksonville safeties, but I think Andrew Wingard ends up being the most productive on the week. So I've got him rounding out the top 12. So now let's go back, read off the top 12, and we'll get out of here, guys. So at number 1, we've got Tykee Smith, Nick Cross at 2, Tre'Von Moehrig, Kamren Curl, Jeremy Chin, Brian Branch, Amani Hooker, Chamarri Conner, Kemari Lassiter, Jordan Poyer, Cooper DeJean, and Andrew Wingard to round out the top 12 defensive backs on the week. So thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you guys find this helpful. If you have any other questions or you just like what you see, what you'd like to see different, who knows? Throw all your stuff in the comment. In the comment section. I love getting down there and talking with you guys. Having some conversations there. If you have questions, I tend to go into great depth. So try to be as specific as you can with your intentions. But again, I just lend my opinions and thoughts, and perhaps I can bring something to the table that you weren't already considering. Is really just my goal. It's not to make the decision for you guys. You guys set that roster decision, that you make that start-sit decision, those waiver wire claims. I just try to give you all of the data that you can possibly have in order to make the most informed decision for your respective IDP team. So, again, throw your comments down in the comment section. Let's chat it up there. I love talking with you guys. And thank you for rocking with me. And we'll be back here next week for some Week 13 IDP rankings.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.